Hello, everybody joining us today. I'm Catherine Holt, the CEO of the Greater Victoria Chamber of Commerce, and I am joined today by Kris Wirk, who is a partner in the local accounting firm Dusanj Wirk and is also the vice chair of the chamber. Welcome, Kris.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you for having me.
Well, we're having you back a second time because you are our all-time most popular guest here at our fireside chats. You were our first guest, and you had well over 800 views for your very useful information that you provided to our members on the challenging world of managing their finances in this difficult time. And since that time, that was about a month ago now, there's been a whole bunch of news, a whole bunch of federal programs that have rolled out, still more to come, very rapidly changing landscape. So we thought we would have you back to provide more current information based on what's unfolded in the last few weeks.
Yeah, I know, and in just a few weeks, it feels like a lifetime ago, just how much things have changed for businesses, kind of the way of life, and then also specifically like the government programs. There's a lot more tangible items probably to speak about today than there were a month ago.
Yeah, it was the message last time was kind of get yourself ready, prepare yourself, try to find out, get your information on your circumstances so you'll be ready to apply. But we're thankfully further down the road now. So let's start. You have been dealing with a number. You said you're swamped. You've been dealing with a great number of employers, business owners that are in the process of applying for these various federal and provincial forms of assistance. Could you talk about some of the hurdles that they've come across, that they're experiencing, and how those major hurdles can be avoided?
Yeah, and I'll mention on the hurdles, but I'd say on a very general or high level, is the programs that they've announced have actually been relatively easy to apply for. The actual application process and the intake of is simple and straightforward to do. So if it's either the loan program or either the two wage subsidy programs, both, there are some hurdles which I'll get into, but I'd say the design of those programs has been really good and efficient for taxpayers. But the biggest hurdle that we would see is a lot of the requirements are to have online access with CRA, what's called through my account. So you can either have a representative do some of the applications like an accounting firm, or you could do them yourselves as the business owner. So it's making sure you have those logins up to date and current. And sometimes they require validation of who the person is. So there's something that gets mailed to your home with a code. So to the extent that you could get that behind you, hopefully a couple weeks ago, but if not, do that today, to make sure that you're up and running for that. So when you do have to apply or can apply, you have the logins to do so. And then related to that, and is making sure you're set up for direct deposit. So if timing of cash flow is a concern, right now CRA would typically either send out a check or direct deposit. If you wanted to speed things up, is make sure you're set up for direct deposit for your business with CRA. That would kind of increase or decrease the time and between when you've applied and when you've received the funds.
Okay, great. Yeah, they are using the CRA established channels, which has, I think, made this remarkably streamlined and efficient at the federal end. Just on a technical note, could you get a bit closer to your mic? We've had a comment from our audience that you're a bit quiet. And
okay, I'll try to. I'll do my best to yell. So
that's much better.
Okay.
Thank you.
Then the other comment, other than just the kind of the boring part about CRA and just being having the process or the logins, is making sure that your information and your bookkeeping and your records are up to date. So a lot of the tests are qualifications based on your revenue. So if you don't have your accounting records up to date, current, and really for the month of March and really soon the month of April up to date, you can't do a fulsome analysis to see if you do qualify. Certain businesses, it'll be very obvious that they qualify or not. Certain ones will be very close to the margins of being able to qualify. So to have timely records prepared would be the other hurdle to avoid, to make sure that things are being done in a timely manner.
And by qualify, you're referring to the criteria for all of these programs have different criteria related to your drop in revenue.
Exactly. So most of the programs are tied to revenue, and some programs are also tied to amount of wages that are paid.
Right.
That should be done timely anyways, but it's really the analysis of what your revenue is. And certain businesses would have a more complicated analysis of revenue. So it's not always just how much cash was collected. There's other metrics to look at. So in those kind of businesses, the more that you have your records ready, the quicker you could do the analysis to see that do you qualify from the months of March, April, or May.
Yeah, and just one comment when you're talking about getting yourself registered for CRA, the other possible hurdle we have coming up is the rent program, which is being run by CMHC. So I don't know if that is going to be, if they are going to be using the CRA channels to provide cash, provide the subsidy for rent. Do you know how they're administering that one?
Not confidently to be able to tell you one way or the other.
Yeah.
But I do believe it's run through CMHC, which is completely separate of CRA. So I imagine it's through CMHC and their mortgage lending, and either through the banks. And the initial requirement was that you had a mortgage on the property, which they have relented on, and said they'll find another method for delivery. But being the fact it was tied to an existing mortgage, I imagine it was through CMHC that was going to be doing it.
Yeah. So we'll see if the CMHC is as smooth and efficient as CRA has proven to be so far. Now, the other thing that we hear a lot about when we're dealing with, as the chamber, with federal ministers have been very available, and bureaucrats, they're trying to, and the prime minister has referred to this, they're trying to modify as they go to ensure people don't fall through the cracks. Are you dealing with people who find themselves having not qualified, that they are falling through some cracks?
Definitely, there are ones that are falling through the cracks, and the biggest program, both dollar-wise and for any taxpayer, is the wage subsidy program. And so that one requires a 15% drop in revenue in March, either compared to the last year, March 2019, or an average at the beginning of the year, and then a 30% drop in April. So many businesses could either be a small drop in revenue, but a significant impact on their cash flow, just either from prior collections being slow or bad debts, or just a high amount of fixed costs that they weren't able to scale down. So those ones would really fall through the cracks. And we do see that quite often. Also ones that have just had their costs escalate. So the revenues could be flat or slightly down, but the costs of hiring temporary employees, the cost of transitioning to more of a virtual environment or online environment is significant, or their margins on what they're able to sell is lower. And the one that still I've seen falling through the cracks is also new businesses. So if you have new businesses that are seasonal, January and February are typical for retail to be the slow months, because December and November is when people spend typically. So if the comparative period is to January and February when it's naturally low, they may not hit it on new businesses. So I have seen that for new businesses that have entered into it. And then conversely, actually, on this, is you see ones that, I don't know if there are terms, but fall into the cracks, where they're falling into being eligible just because it's such a black and white test, whereas they wouldn't necessarily require the funds or are not as hard hit as other businesses. So I think it's a real difficulty in developing a program that's fair and efficient and that gets money out quick, that doesn't require some qualitative judgment based on some CRA officer. So they have obviously just a black and white test, you attest to it, but there are instances where many businesses are missed, and I think a few are actually falling into it unattendedly.
Wow. So maybe we'll keep on advocating for a broader definition or a different definition so that some of those outliers can still qualify, and see if we can move the federal government on a little bit more in trying to paper over cracks.
Exactly, but tying it to payroll and wages, and that's really what stimulates the economy, is making sure people are back to work or encouraged to work. The incentive is 100% right, but I do agree, if you broaden the scope and lower, say, the dollar amounts, you maybe hit more businesses that need it, and maybe lower the bureaucracy or the difficulty in calculating and determining these items.
Yeah. Okay, you alluded to this. You just said that there's some businesses that maybe don't require the help, but they still technically qualify based on their decline in revenue, but they can still function fine. So are there businesses that you would say as their professional advisor that they should not apply for these programs, even if they qualify? Or should businesses make the most of these federal opportunities while they can, given how uncertain the future of our economy is?
I would agree with the second half of the statement is you don't know what the long-term impact to anyone's businesses confidently is at this time. And related to that is you don't know what the government programs that will be available in the future will be to support. So if you defer now and find out the impact to your business is worse than what you had anticipated, the programs may not be available in the future. So on that respect, I would say apply for what you're eligible for and within the rules to apply currently, because you just can't, no one has a crystal ball and no one has any confident idea of what the fall or next winter will look like. And the one caveat to that is certain programs do have other qualifications. Specifically, there's the loan program. So it's a loan up to 40,000 that's administered through your bank. That program does require that it's used for operations and not repayment of other debt. So there are ones that do have that you're attesting to when you sign up for the program, that the funds will be used for certain aspects. So those would be the ones that you wouldn't just apply because the money's there. You'd apply because you have a need for those funds.
Right. Yeah. Chamber applied for that one, and that was exactly the information we got. It had to be used for fixed, predictable operating costs, not pay off a line of credit or keep it for the future or something like that.
Exactly.
So I think that's an example of what you're talking about. So that's one downfall or risk, that you apply for it and you can't apply it for the things that it's supposed to be used for. But there must be some other risks associated with participating in these programs.
Yeah.
Could you talk about those?
For sure. So the biggest risk one is the wage subsidy program. So there is a significant penalty if you apply for that program and were found not to qualify. So if you applied for the program and you didn't have the calculated drop in revenue that's prescribed, there's a very significant penalty that will be applied in that case.
Okay, so a penalty beyond repaying the subsidy is, so you have to repay and you have a penalty?
Exactly. So so it's not just that they put you in a position where you would have been had you not applied, they put you in a worse off position. So in that respect, if you found that you are close to qualifying but unsure, that's where it does make sense to talk to your advisor either and go through and have someone else take a look at that calculation and not just blanket apply for it and then ask for forgiveness down the road. It's better to be proactive and document it. And then related to that too is I'd have no confident idea when they'll get around to auditing these. Their offices are closed. It's a $78 billion program.
Yeah.
So it could take a long time before they start getting their way over to Vancouver Island and say our membership base to get audited on these. So it would be that keeping the documentation. So you'd have clients, this would be boring, but clients that switch their accounting software or change their controller or move offices. Things get lost frequently or it happens. So definitely when you're applying for this is keep something on file of how you did your calculation and how you came to that conclusion. And then so that you have that documentation ready. So if it's a year from now, 2 years from now, you'd have that support available and not trying to recreate it in the future. And the other risk, and I don't know if this is maybe a business risk or reputational risk, is your name. Part of the legislation for the wage subsidy program is that you did publish your name on a list. I believe through a website is what they intended. Haven't really seen any details of that. They obviously haven't started that. I think that's a plan for the fall. But there could be a reputational risk for certain businesses who've applied for it. Probably would see that more on the public company side or ones that in that respect, and not so much on the private business side. But that would be one other consideration for applying.
Yeah, so you're talking about the risk of that will indicate that you do have financial difficulties, at least at the point where you applied. You may have recovered, but by the time your name has been published, it suggests that you're in financial difficulty, that type of reputational risk.
Exactly that. So I would see, and I wouldn't see that on the private company side, but on the public company side, if a company paid out a large dividend to its shareholders come December, but then at the same time had applied for government subsidy in the spring, optically, how does that look? Probably not favorable to that company. That said, I'd say that's on the public company side, and because their statements are also public. So people would be able to review the financial statements and see the profitability of those entities. On the private company side, I wouldn't see that as being a risk or as significant of a risk.
Right. And, yes, I hear you about the public company side for sure, but we're certainly in a circumstance where it's not a failure of the company in and of itself to qualify for these federal programs. It's absolutely an external force of monumental proportions that has driven the need. So you're not saying that it's a shameful thing just to have to qualify for the program itself.
No, and I think if I remember correctly, I think on the Monday morning when the site opened, I think they're at 10,000 or so by noon applicants. So far from shameful, and I think it's definitely needed and warranted for businesses to encourage employment.
Yeah, and smart move, I think, as we said earlier, if you qualify, get what you can to keep your business alive. That's the whole point of what's going on here. Talking about another risk, the commercial rent program. I know we're probably a little premature in talking about that because all the details haven't been released. We just mentioned it's probably a CMHC administered program. Don't know exactly how that's going to roll out. But could you talk a little bit about risks you see associated with that program as it's been described so far?
Sure. So the way that the program works is the landlord who makes the application for the forgiveness or for the support for the rent, but it's tied to the tenant having a reduction in revenue of 70%. So there is a slight, or not, it's more than slight, I guess. There's a significant communication that has to happen between both parties. And if it's the land and who is responsible on repayment of those funds, if it turns out that the revenue drop was calculated incorrectly, I'd say that'd be a definite risk to the landlord. And then if the landlord has to, and I'm not sure if it's the case, but the landlord is the one signing on for the application, do they have a responsibility to know or to review the revenues or the financial information of their tenant? And is the tenant required to give that? And most tenants probably don't give their financial statements or how well they're doing or to their landlord because there's no reason to do so. Do they have to kind of be an open book and provide their records to them so that they can make that? So I think that's going to be difficult. And then the other risk, and I think this would be difficult as well, is no lease is the same. Every lease is nuanced in its terms of what's defined as gross rent, what's defined as net rent, what's defined as forgiveness periods, and what's for say new tenants. And then they also have different scales of timing of when rents could be. Some rents are higher in the summer and then lower in the winter. How do those all get averaged out in this program? Especially when there's going to be a million different types of leases and having one broad rule that impacts all of them. So I think similar to how you see with the wage subsidy program, where certain ones fall through the cracks, I think you could see that on this just because of the uniqueness of how every lease agreement will be.
Yeah, absolutely. You're taking something that's firmly in the private sector and trying to apply a public sector program. Things like tax payments have been a public program right from day one. So there's been certain infrastructure in place, and now they're using it for these programs. But when you apply it to rent, that's an entirely new interface between public and private sector. So I think you're right. There's going to be all kinds of unintended or unanticipated challenges.
Yeah, and
consequences.
I say this just, I think this off the top of my head, but I believe the application period is only until the end of the summer as well for that program. I believe it's open for the months of April, May, June, or March, April, May.
April, May, June.
April, May, June. And I think the applications all have to be in by August 31st. So the negotiations between whether the landlord wants to apply for this or not, the clock's ticking because that's only 4 short months away at this point.
Yeah, there's going to be a whole bunch of new relationships being built between landlords and tenants on a foundation or a premise that they never anticipated. So that is a challenge unto itself. So we have certainly been encouraging at the chamber that landlords and tenants, please connect and see what you can do and figure it out and see if you can take advantage. It's a mutually beneficial program if you qualify and if you can get it off the ground and make it work for the two of you, but at least start the conversation.
Oh, exactly.
Yeah, because we've already heard, there's every kind of relationship between landlords and tenants too. So there's that to manage as well. And so further to our things to keep in mind with regard to these programs, are there future consequences people should keep in mind, future debt or taxation consequences or burdens that you've talked about a few? Are there other things that people should keep in mind for the future?
Well, speaking of just how quick time flies by, is a lot of the initial programs were tax deferrals. So there was tax deferrals for employer health tax on the provincial side being the largest one probably, and there's also been deferrals for GST and corporate tax payments, as well as personal payments. As we move along through the spring and then heading into the summer, those dates come due sooner, and those would be a lot of taxes that were only related to the 2019 year ends. Then it's starting to catch up for 2020 taxes or installments or those payments as well. So the deferrals definitely helped on the immediate cash flow, but as the clock turns, those become due sooner. So then that's a cash flow issue I see coming up in the future, depending on how strong businesses come out of this in the coming months.
Absolutely. Maybe there'll be further deferrals depending on how we're doing at that point. But if not, the fall's going to be it's going to be a big reckoning.
It will be. It's almost like a double hit at that point.
Yes. Yes. Well, I have some confidence that governments will recognize that impact and that this hasn't and is unlikely to be a quick recovery. So they will have to be dealing with some of those consequences over a longer period of time. So we're just about out of time, 5 minutes left here. Couple of quick questions. What is your overall observation, impression about how businesses are doing so far? I know that's a broad and sweeping question and that there's a huge range of experiences, but could you just give us your observation on how businesses are coping?
It is so broad because I think it really depends what industry. I say certain industries are dramatically affected and very significantly to the extent they've closed shop and they're just waiting to reopen. Obviously, that's the extreme case. Then you have others that are, say, in the situation where the business is redone. So say like our own, where you're operating, but you're just doing things in a different environment. And so you're doing things more virtually, more electronically. You're kind of maybe speeding up where you wanted to get with your systems and processes quicker than what you anticipated. But certain things are just being inefficient, and you're having a lot more remote working. And then I think you have others that are doing similar as they were previously, but they're probably incurring a lot more costs, and collections and cash flow is definitely probably slowed down on their end. So I would say there's no business that's been unaffected. I can't think of actually that's been. I can think of one or two that have actually been better or doing financially better than the previous, but that's the rare exception. I'd say everyone is found it difficult, and I think everyone's having a real difficulty of planning of what the future looks like. I don't think anyone I've spoken to has the same two answers of what they think exactly the timing or magnitude of recovery would look like. I know I've flip-flopped probably twice a day, every day, of being optimistic or pessimistic. And I think that's the norm for most people. And so I think for business, a lot of successful businesses is planning what not only this year is, but what next year will look like, and then planning accordingly. And I think that's very challenging.
Yeah, always challenging. But, if you've run your business for a long period of time, you usually know patterns and seasonality and demand and what to expect. So just the unknown nature of what the future is now, I think that's very, very trying for so many businesses. And as you say, those that are down and also those that are up. And I'm just going to mention our job board, for example, 200 postings over this period of time of vacancies. And, you know, when you talk about costs going up, I think a lot of employees were laid off and maybe are now collecting their CERB benefit and aren't available. So employers are even short-staffed in this time when they're actually have a lot of demand.
And I think that's going to be one of the issues with the CERB program, the 2,000 a month for those affected by COVID. And then there's a similar program for students. Is the disincentive to work from those programs is significant. And so as businesses start reopening across, let's say, BC or Vancouver Island, how do you pay employees on a part-time basis or full-time basis that's competitive against the CERB benefit? And from a federal government's perspective, the CERB benefits has to be a program that works across all of Canada, so from the Maritimes over here. But different provinces will start having different times when I assume, of when they have different back to work, scope of going back to work. So how do you balance a federal program against a local economy that could be moving ahead of the trend against others? That's gonna be really challenging. So I think we could see a point where unemployment's high, but the job board's full.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so just to wrap up, I always like to say, make sure everybody go see your accountant. Here is a good example of why accountants can be invaluable to you when you're struggling with the current circumstances and these multiple federal programs. So I'm sure you'd agree with that advice, Kris. Do you have any other resources that you like to point people towards?
I think go see your accountant, go see your chamber as well. So the chamber being the better of the two sources, personable. But the chamber, but the website on the chamber, actually, I was just taking a look yesterday, has done a really great job of summarizing a lot of the resources. And so I think that's a great first stop. And I also think the chamber, through just staying connected with other businesses and bouncing ideas off your peers or in other industries and colleagues, is always a great way to help your business. So I think staying connected is important.
Yep. CRA website was another resource that is actually very straightforward and easy to navigate. Yeah. And
for government website, it's as good as it gets.
Yeah. And so thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll have more fireside chats coming up next week. The restaurant industry is up next. Ian Tossison from that association, they've had restaurant industry has been one of the very, very hard hit sectors. So we'll talk to him about what he's advising government do to help the restaurant sector. And to your point about the staying connected, we have a Zoom-based mixer tonight at 4 o'clock. So I certainly encourage everybody to join us there. They're actually a nice break from the grind of thinking about COVID all day long and fun social time. So thank you, Kris. Thanks again for all the valuable information.